Hey everybody, Oliver Altine here, Authenticity Show producer. I just wanted to say a couple words before we get started with today's episode. First of all, thank you for listening. We really appreciate our listeners. We make this show out of love. That's the only reason we do it, and we're really happy you're out there listening. And please share it with your friends and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And please connect with us on social media if you haven't already done so. We would love to hear from you. And furthermore, this episode is actually a re-presentation of episode 14 from way back in October of 2017. This is the episode where I really felt like we had something special with this podcast, something different. And here's the thing. Sometimes if you don't have a name for something, then you have no control over it. But when you have a name for something, you can think about it more clearly and exert some sort of control over it. And so that's what this episode is about for me. Sacred deceptions. This is the thing, we encounter this every day in our lives, but we may not have had a name for it before. After listening to this episode, you'll have a name for that, and you'll have more clarity around it and more control over it. All right, here we go. Sacred deceptions. You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. In this episode, Carlos and Satch discuss the idea of sacred deceptions, initiations, shamanism, ceremonial magic, and poetic lies that reveal a deeper truth.
It is true without falsehood, and most certain. What is below is like that which is above, and what is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. As all things were formed by one, by the thought of one, so all things are born from this one thing by choice. Its father is the sun, its mother the moon. The wind carries it in its belly. Its nurse is the earth. It is the author of all perfection throughout the world. The power is strong when changed into earth. Separate earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with care. Ascend from earth to heaven and descend again to earth to unite the power of the higher and lower things. Thus you will obtain the glory of the whole world, and the shadows will leave you. This has more strength than strength itself, for it overcomes all subtle things and penetrates every solid. Thus the world was framed. Hence proceed wonders, which means are here. Therefore I am Hermes Trismegistus, having the three parts of the world philosophy. That which I had to say of the operation of the sun is perfected. So that was the Tabula Smaragdina, or the Emerald Tablet of Hermes.
Who is Hermes?
No one really knows.
Oh,
Isn't that cool?
I love a good mystery.
Right. It is a mystery. It's a sacred mystery with a capital M, because those that study it more deeply are hermeticists. They're people who follow and seek the philosophy of Hermes Trismegistus. Some people say that Hermes was a god.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's, what I think of when I hear the word Hermes.
Yeah. The thing is, in ancient cultures, of course, through time, one culture borrows some of the mythology of the previous culture, and it gets changed a little bit along the way. So the origin that I'm familiar with is that it derives from Thoth or Thoth, which is the root of the word thought. Or in some pronunciations, Jehuti, right? The Egyptian version of it. And Trismegistus means literally thrice great.
Okay.
Or, master of the three components of the sacred philosophy. That's so it was a moniker, probably not his birth name, probably more of a sacred title. And in all likelihood, it represents more of a concept than an actual being itself or a person. That the school of Hermes was, those acolytes and devotees of the Hermetic philosophy.
Okay.
And at the core of it is this document, which is called the Tabula Smaragdina, which is the emerald tablet that I just read you. But why did I start with that?
Yeah.
I think more importantly, because I think people listening to this might be wondering, why are we talking about this? You and I had discussed the idea of what a sacred deception is.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. A sacred deception.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine two more opposite things, something sacred and something deceptive.
Right. It sounds like an oxymoron.
It does. But it works because there is a paradox. You mentioned earlier to me about the ethics around lying.
Yeah.
You gave the example of a parent teasing a kid or playing around with a kid and maybe saying something positive like, wow, you're as strong as Superman, I think you said.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I was thinking of that one.
Kids love that. They absolutely love it. And it's a lie.
It is.
But it's coming from a good place. It's perhaps beneficial for them to believe that they can be strong.
Yeah, right.
At that age.
Yeah, exactly. And it sort of reminds me of the topic of these cultural lies that we collectively tell children.
Like what?
Like Santa Claus.
Oh, right.
The Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, these kinds of things. And we don't feel like we're deceiving them with malice. You know what I mean? We're not deceiving them to get over on these kids, to prove how dumb they are, right? I mean, it's not what we're doing. We do it with, we sort of tell this little fib to these kids with a collective giggle.
It's part of the fun.
We're up to something, and that way, when they finally learn the reality of the situation, then they're sort of initiated now. They sort of are stepping up into a little bit higher level of adulthood.
Initiation, I think, is something sorely lacking in modern Western culture.
Absolutely.
It exists, but certainly not to the degree that it used to exist.
Yeah.
And that's a component of sacred deception.
Yeah.
Why are they suddenly a man or a woman at the point which they choose to initiate them into that level?
Right.
It's a convincing moment, but what is it? What are you convincing? It's a deception. You're not necessarily speaking a fact, but you're certainly speaking an inner truth, a truth of maybe a different order, like a truth that relates to your religion, or it maybe relates to your beliefs on some level, or it relates to a lesson from nature.
Yeah. I heard Joseph Campbell talk about some sort of indigenous culture that taught the boys, or I guess the children, to be terrified of the masks that were in their society. The masks of all the monsters, the spirits and things like that. And they were trained to fear them. And then at a certain age, the men would kidnap a boy, take him out someplace, and they'd be wearing the masks that he's been trained to be fearful of. And then he would have to basically fight one of the grown-ups who's wearing the mask. And the grown-ups would allow the boy to win. And then after the fight was over, the adult would take the mask off and then put the mask on the child. And now he's a man.
That's so cool.
He had to face his fear. He had to face the terror of the mask in order to become a man.
Oh, that's a great example.
It's beautiful.
When I was up in Mendocino, I met an older gentleman, and he told me a story about his childhood growing up in more of an Appalachian culture.
Okay.
He was talking about how the culture of initiation was retained there. all the way from the European times. And he described a situation where, if you can picture this, a young man during his initiation would be brought out to a secret area of the forest, and he would be tied to the tree.
Okay.
He'd have to be there all day, fasting and so forth. And after the sun set, all of a sudden, very, very far away, coming from a nondescript direction, like seemingly from all around, is this sound. A deep, whirring, vibratory sound that at first he could just faintly make out, and then suddenly it gets closer and closer, closer. And this vibration starts to get so heavy and thick around him that his mind begins to play all sorts of havoc and tricks with him.
Yeah.
You could feel the vibrational frequency around getting thicker, stronger, and more resonant. And what it was the sound of a bull roarer, but not one. Many, many bull roarers being swung by all the adults, all the initiates. And as they got closer and closer, they were also in masks. And so this sound got so terrifying by the time it came within a close range. By that time, the trance state set into the young initiate's mind was so heavy that, and of course the darkness obscured vision, he imagined all sorts of things, his worst possible fear coming at him.
Yeah.
And then the masks, of course, obscured their look as well. And finally, when they revealed themselves, key members of the tribe would, after taking him off the tree, would give or bestow an important lesson. And eventually, the initiate is given a bull roarer of their own, and of course, the cycle completes itself.
Yeah.
But having overcome that fear, imagine how receptive his mind was to the lessons of the elders in the tribe.
Right. He suddenly is able to learn the lesson in a unique way that he maybe wasn't able to learn the lesson as powerfully before.
Yeah, his whole world, in a way, his previous world, cracked. And through that crack, a light of a whole different world comes in. That's the power of a sacred deception,
Wow.
I think.
That's great. Wow, that's beautiful. I love the depth of a sacred deception like that. And I feel that in our culture, and standard American culture, at least here in California, it's something that we're missing. We have little small deceptions. I remember when I was in 6th grade, my mom and I moved to a new town, and I had to start a new elementary school. And it was scary, it was terrifying, and I met, some new kids, and we sort of took to each other, and at recess, I think it was the first or second day, we went around the back of the building, and they told me that I had to do the possum sit-up. So they did the possum sit-up. And so I laid down, and they covered my eyes, and another kid pulled his pants down to moon me, and so they made me do a sit-up so that I would smack my face into his butt. That's the possum sit-up, right? So it was a hazing. Yeah, it was a little miniature rite of passage in order to be part of the crew. I think actually what happened was I sensed that there was a butt over my face, and I didn't do the sit up. But anyways, it counted, right? And it was a joke. They fooled me. They played a joke on me, and it was necessary for me to sort of take my licks, so to speak, to become one of the guys there. And so I have to reflect back on that, with, some good feelings. It was funny. And I was part of the crew. I was deceived. I'm not sure how sacred that was, but...
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
When we don't have really well thought out rituals, really well thought out initiations,
Yes.
then it shows up in maybe a diluted form.
Yeah,
I think,
yeah, like or a dangerous
sometimes
form.
a dangerous form.
Yeah, for example, gang initiations.
Yeah.
May not be. I certainly understand why they exist. In a way, it's what we're talking about, but maybe it's not so healthy. Maybe sometimes it is. Maybe it's healthy for that environment. It's an interesting question to explore.
Well, social healing, I think, is one of the reasons for sacred deceptions in shamanism. I think when there's been a great loss, maybe after a war or a battle or a great sickness, and the village feels devastated by those losses, I think they look to the shaman for refocusing.
Yeah.
And so he might do, or she might do, some kind of a psychodrama using sympathetic magic and things like that, and maybe even some elements of contagious magic. Sympathetic being, you're using, in a sense, a metaphor for the thing that you're representing.
Sure.
It's representational magic.
Yeah.
And contagious magic is the idea that you can catch the magic, sort of like a voodoo doll.
Sure, a voodoo doll, or like the old day, you get a piece of their hair, and then you can affect them from a distance, or something like that. Sympathetic magic, right?
Yeah.
Right. Wow.
But so those things can heal a tribe because it gives them a channel for their negative feelings, a way of processing it, a way of grieving. In Ireland, the way the women wail at the Irish wakes, right? Okay. Throw them, in Italy, the way they throw themselves in the coffins, So it does exist, even with the advent of monotheism, Christianity, things like that.
Yeah.
Some of those old pagan ways shine through. Examples of that are within the seasons, Christmas, Easter.
Yeah.
These are essentially pagan in nature, but
Halloween.
Halloween, right? Samhain, right? Those things have been adapted or adopted into Christian behavior by associating a Christian myth around it.
Right. Yeah.
The rising of Christ for, the spring fertility rituals.
Yes.
And the Day of the Dead or All Saints Day around Halloween and
absolutely
and so on.
Yeah. So I'm curious to explore this idea of healing, sacred deceptions and healing. I recall when my mother passed away, we had planned, some kind of gathering, a little service, in her honor. And I remember really not feeling like I wanted to do that. It had been a long struggle, and I really just wanted it all to go away and be finished. She's gone. I saw little value in having the service, but I sort of realized that I needed to do it for everybody else. And I was dreading it. And I had to get up and say a few things, and then people spoke a little bit, and some music was there. And I actually remember having this conversation with my sister. I said, I was really not looking forward to this. And now I see why society does these things, because I feel a lot better.
Wow.
I needed to have public closure. It was important. And even though I wasn't looking forward to it, I got the benefit of it because our ancestors figured this out a long time ago, that we need to do something like that. It helps us feel better. In a way, it healed me, reminiscing on stories and singing songs and people offering blessings and things like that. A bit ritualistic. To me, I'm thinking in my mind while I'm sitting there that, none of this really is going to influence anything. None of this really matters. None of this is going to, help her spirit, so to speak. It's all symbolic, but I felt better when it was over. And that's really what it was all about for me. I felt better.
I think that's a common enough experience that's why it lasts. That's why it sticks so in cultures everywhere. Things like funerals and goodbye parties and award ceremonies and send-offs.
Yeah, closure.
Are part of closure,
Got to have it.
It's very important in groups.
So
group dynamics.
Yeah, we have orientations and graduations and reunions and all these types of ritualistic types of things, you know.
And it seems like people feel cheated if they don't get it.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because it's probably, it satisfies some basic human needs that are relatively universal.
Yeah. And this is something I see in my students a lot. We'll have a graduation ceremony coming up, and I'll hear students talk about how, I don't know if I'm going to go, you know. And I always tell them, you will be thankful that you go. And I always play up the graduations because I see it every year. They show up to the graduations. It's amazing how happy they are and how much fun they're having with their families. And it's worth it. It's worth it when they show up. You know, we're talking about sacred deceptions. And I think it's interesting to bring up this idea that it's an art form. It's art.
It's a sacred art.
And to sort of paraphrase Picasso's famous saying that, you know, art is a lie that helps you see the truth.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, and you know, these ritualistic types of things, or when a shaman lovingly deceives one person to help them heal or to change their psychology around an issue or something, it's a lie, but it's that lie with the twinkle in your eye. You know, that's like it's an art form. It is a lie that helps you see something that maybe you're not seeing.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love that quote. And I'm glad that you said that this is an art form because magic plays a huge part in my personal philosophy. And I see myself as a spiritual artist in many respects. The rituals that I do, I'm seeking qualities that I find in art. You know, its composition, you know, its concept, a vulnerability of exploration combined with harness technique that may have been learned or practiced over time. You know, there's discipline in it. And there's also a lot of freedom in it.
Okay.
Within certain, you know, the structure supports the freedom in many respects. So it is an art form. And you can get better and better and better at it. And you can never fully master every aspect of it. It's limitless and quite beautiful and complex and simple.
Sure.
I mean, I'm saying paradoxes, but it's because it's, you know, ideally it's a reflection of what life is about to you. What you believe life is, how you experience life should be a part of how you express your magic.
Yeah.
And I think that when it integrates into everything that you do, when it's woven into your healing and your service to other human beings and the way you love and the formal ritualistic aspects that you perform as a magician.
Yeah.
They're all important and they integrate and they inform one another. They become cross-pollinating. Every aspect that you learn in life deepens your understanding of what magic is. Yeah. And there's a lot of nonsense written about magic.
Sure.
And hopefully by now we've become really clear that we're not talking about prestidigitation or illusion or stage magic here per se.
Yeah.
We're talking about the ancient practice of ritual spirituality. You know, actual ceremonial magic.
Yeah.
Is what we're referring to.
I was going to ask you, is there a definition for this kind of magic?
There are a lot of definitions, yeah. Aleister Crowley, I think, said it best. You know, he said that magic is the art and science of creating changes in accordance with will.
Yeah, that's perfect. And wow, that's beautiful.
When he's talking about will, he's talking about your true self.
Yeah.
Not just your whim per se, but the part of you that is creating its destiny in this world. I like to call myself a psychonaut often because I think that our ability as human beings to try out different ways of looking at things is a magical process.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. How so? Could you describe that a little bit more? How can one become a psychonaut or practice psychonautism?
Okay, well, first of all, the psycho part of psychonaut is from psyche, meaning soul, right? Okay. So whether or not you believe in a soul or whatever you think the soul is, let's just say it's your awareness, your consciousness.
Sure, psyche and, you know, would refer to the mind.
Same as psychology,
like psychiatry
right?
or
psychiatry. Yeah. And then naut is referring to nautical or sailing. So it's referencing a sailor. So you're a sailor of the mind, or you're a soul traveler, or you're a consciousness explorer.
Right. Rowing through the ocean of consciousness.
Yeah, or sailing with the winds, or flowing with the currents of thought and experience. So, number one, if you want to be a psychonaut, it helps to start with the attitude that you're exploring. And so it's okay to allow yourself to follow things through from their source to their completion, or from somewhere where you are back to the source again. I mean, if you want to explore any thought, and this is an element that comes in with meditation, you have to eventually follow it back to its root.
Yeah.
You know, what is this series of thoughts leading to, but also where is it coming from? So a psychonaut always explores those things.
Okay.
But also, a psychonaut is really curious to expand their awareness, to expand their mind, to expand their comfort zone in different ways. There are cultures that do this in a ritual form, and some of them involve shamanic inebriants or potions or what we call entheogens.
Yeah.
You know, substances that produce psychoactive changes that tend to remind the person that they're connected to everything else.
Indian peyote ceremonies.
Ayahuasca. You know, mushrooms, mescaline, etc.
Tribes that do iboga, things like that.
Exactly. All that. And that's a tradition that's on every continent.
Yeah.
Just about every ancient culture. And, you know, has persisted from, pardon the pun, but God knows only when it started, right?
What's the difference between a sacred deception and a lie? Is there a difference, do you think?
There is a difference. Lying is a much more broad term, I think. I think a sacred deception is limiting the idea of lie to things that are healing on a social level, personal level, or transformative in a positive way. When people tell white lies to spare someone's feelings.
Sure.
Some people might consider that a sacred deception, although I don't.
Okay.
I see it as kind, but I don't necessarily include it in the idea of a sacred deception, because to me, a sacred deception is a highly intentional act that has much farther reaching implications and repercussions.
Yeah.
Positive repercussions. If you were a stage magician and you had developed the skill and the craft to do card tricks and to make things disappear and make fire come out of the air, seemingly, those techniques could adapt themselves very well to a shamanistic ritual. But the stage magician isn't necessarily doing a sacred deception.
Right. That's maybe more of a entertaining deception, or, you know.
Yeah. There are, just to say this, that there are a few magicians that I've noticed who are performance magicians who are doing sacred deceptions. I think if you YouTubed a man by the name of Eugene Berger, that's Berger.
Okay.
Because he teaches that magic can be a healing quality, that it can have sacred components to it, even incorporating ideas of philosophy and paganism, into the presentation, and it can be a very powerful combination. I mean, let's think about it in reverse. The revivalist, fundamentalist Christian movements, the Pentecostals, and they're doing all sorts of speaking in tongues, and maybe in the evangelical movement, there's preachers that are doing laying on of hands, and you are healed, and people falling back the moment they're touched. And, you can see Darren Brown, the UK mentalist, performing these things on stage, basically demonstrating that a lot of it is suggestion and hypnosis and things like that. But the ones that are performing those acts, I think their intention is to portray the idea of a power that's moving through them. And the net effect is that people pass out. They feel subjectively like they're being overwhelmed with the power of spirit, and so on. So yeah, there are lots of examples you can see.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily believe that all the evangelical examples are good examples. I think
Sure.
in many cases it's designed to fleece people's pockets, so to speak.
Yeah. How about some of the Catholic traditions? Are there some sacred deceptions in that?
I think that a lot of the lives of the saints are potentially examples of sacred deceptions. I don't know because I wasn't there, but it's plausible at least that some of the saints were just wonderful human beings, and the stories and legends that grew up around them helped to stoke more belief, deeper faith in people, because they told of supernatural powers and supernatural happenings, phenomena, right? Manifesting, levitations and all sorts of things. And so I think that's an example.
Okay.
Or if you go back to the biblical idea of Christ turning water into wine and multiplying the fish and bread or whatever, those are examples of magical events, miracles that are supposed to inspire people to believe more deeply. And what's the intention behind the belief? It's pretty clear that the intention is to invoke better feelings, better behaviors in people, to get them to quote unquote be better human beings.
Right.
You know, from their point of view, they have a philosophy about what a better human being would look like and behave like. So they tell their stories in such a way to encourage that. And if it involves some magical sacred deceptions in the form of parables and stories of miracles and defying scientific truths that we found, that's a component of, I think, the religious experience to many people.
Have you heard of the cargo cults in the islands of like Vanuatu and Tanna?
Yes, but you'll have to remind me the details of that.
I just pulled it up to remind myself. In Vanuatu and Tanna, apparently there was some World War II, soldier of some sort of serviceman by the name of John Frum. And somehow the indigenous people of these islands created an entire religious cult surrounding this man, John Frum. And apparently this individual really existed. He was just a serviceman of some sort in the military.
Yeah.
But they created these elaborate religions all surrounding John Frum as the Messiah. And they would even clear out the forest to make runways so that when John Frum returns someday, that he'll have a place to land his plane. And they would build like a little tower, and they'd even like make like a straw dummy. And they would the image of a human to draw John Frum from the heavens down to land his plane.
Oh, yes.
And then
Sympathetic magic.
Yeah. And then as they were investigating these cargo cults, they found out that they speak to John Frum. They said, well, how do you speak to John Frum? It turned out that they had a radio. And what was the radio? The radio was like some shaman woman with wires and things all tied around her, and she was channeling John Frum, right? Wow. It's cute. It was an interesting thing to study, because all the various little regions, the little islands and things had their slight variations. It was the same basic kind of John Frum cult.
I only practice Orthodox John Frum religion.
Yeah, exactly right.
I'm not into its variants.
Yeah, and they can't even figure out who the real John Frum was.
Right.
But there are all these little variant religions all about John Frum in these islands.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's tempting to just look at it as funny or comical, and I think that's definitely one way to look at it for sure from our Western culture.
Right.
But another way to look at it is that it's an example of what we're talking about. It's an example of our innate capacity for ritual, and it also speaks to our desire to have something beyond the everyday experience. That the goal, I think, of ritual is to make the sacred experience happen more often in your daily experience.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is that we're sort of genetically predisposed towards being psychonauts.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's
so
awakening your human potential when you become a psychonaut, and you can explore that in so many different ways.
Right.
Just trying on a new belief for a day, that can be challenging for some people because they're worried that, well, isn't that going to be, it feels like schizophrenia to them, but at the same time, it builds flexibility.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you do when you adopt two different sides in a debate? And then, what if you're taking a debate class and your teacher says, today you're going to argue for the death penalty. Tomorrow you're going to argue against the death penalty.
Yeah.
You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Next up, Carlos and Satch continue their conversation about sacred deceptions, magic, and unexplained phenomena.
Well, I want to go back to something that you had mentioned. You were talking about magic being basically, an agent of change, to use your will to create some kind of, effect or some sort of change. I am a big fan of the TV show River Monster.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's an Animal Planet show
fun.
with Jeremy Wade.
Yeah.
So Jeremy Wade goes around the world investigating these, stories of freshwater incidences where people are attacked by freshwater monsters and things like that. And he often goes into pretty remote areas, different parts of the globe. And sometimes he will search and search and search. And of course, what he tries to do is catch one of these river monsters. And I've noticed there's been many episodes where he's struggled. He cannot catch the thing he's going after. He's trying. He's got his fishing poles in the water. He's trying. He can't catch one. Everything goes wrong. And quite often, he will go to the local shaman in the village. And he always does a great job of really making an effort to honor the culture of the local people. And he'll ask for help, and he'll go to the shaman. And the shaman will often do some kind of ritual. They will maybe communicate with the spirit of the river, or maybe a particular god who is in charge of that type of animal, And they'll do some rituals and some magic. And I've noticed that almost every single time he does that, he catches the fish that he's looking for right after that ritual's performed. And it's very interesting. Every time I watch it, I think that it's not that the ritual really appeased a river god and the god gave up the fish, but that there was this collective consciousness of will putting together a desire. And it amplifies the power. And they create this vibration of what they want. It's basically like mass positive thinking. And he always catches what he's looking for after he does the ritual. It's interesting. It just caused me to reflect on that when you described that earlier.
Yeah, I guess as a psychonaut, as somebody who practices sacred deceptions, as somebody who is an urban shaman in a certain respect, a magician, a seeker, I'm open to different interpretations. Like, it's not so important to me why it's happening.
Yeah,
just that it happens.
Yeah, it happens.
But I do like thinking about all the different models of magic, explanations of what might be going on to create the effect.
Yeah.
Like, as you were telling me that, you mentioned amplification of thought and things like that. And that's definitely one of the paradigms, one of the models of how magic can work.
Sure.
There's other models too. There's, more modern theories like the morphic fields theory that, there's this morphic field that you're altering when you, this is a Rupert Sheldrake is from the Royal Society, and he gets a lot of flack for it, but he believes in it, and he has his arguments to make about it. That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
There's so many different models for why, to theorize why magic works.
Yeah. Various
or that it works.
Yeah. Various hypotheses about
various hypotheses, and they all have something of value to offer. We talked about different formula of the ages. We talked about viewing the source as feminine versus viewing the source as a masculine force versus seeing it the way we look at it as a pair.
Yeah.
Those are just explanations of something that goes well beyond explanation, really.
Yeah, yeah.
And even if we were to adopt a belief that somehow the ritual relaxes the mind and gets rid of anxiety, it calms and focuses the mind, that can have a physiological effect. And that's another way to explain it.
Right.
There's a hypnotic explanation that you've transformed the inner worldview and the way they're relating with their experience, and that can have a cumulative effect on the environment because we are connected to an ecosystem. And at some level, whether we perceive it consciously or not, we're interacting, changing, altering, and interplaying with all these forces that are all around us.
Yeah, yeah.
So cats respond, dogs respond. A pet owner usually gets to notice certain things about the way they're connected to their pet. If they come home and they're angry, their pet reacts differently than when they're feeling at peace.
Right.
There's the common thought, I think, is that animals don't know the difference. They're not smart enough. They don't have that sensitivity. But most animal owners have a tendency to start to recognize that, no, that's not true. Yeah.
My animals know.
They know, and you start to feel a connection that goes way beyond that.
Yeah.
And so what is that?
And I know when my animals aren't doing well.
Yeah.
It goes both ways.
And it's not necessarily something you can visually describe, but it could be a gut feeling.
Yeah.
Right. We process. We have these preconscious processes that can alert us through the rest of our physiology.
Yeah.
So I don't think that I'm trying to say that all of these magical rituals are just so easily explained by these processes, right? These physical processes.
Right.
I'm just saying it's useful to be open to all the different models because it helps you to realize that at the end of the day, it makes sense to allow for certain rituals.
Yeah.
Believing that you're lucky has a tendency to create more opportunities for you. You recognize the opportunities for one thing, but that belief has a tendency to create more offers as well. Now, this isn't by any means proof, but I'd like to point out that Darren Brown has a wonderful show called The Secret of Luck. You can watch it on YouTube, and it's just another example of how he does an experiment on a whole town, and by the end of it, you recognize that the people who believed that they were getting luck by touching this clay or stone effigy of a dog in the park, that it was giving them some kind of benefit, right? Caused them to win the lottery and all these things that are documented in the show. And it surprised Darren Brown because he went in with the idea that it would make no difference.
Sure.
And so he was adjusting his point of view towards the end of the show, saying, well, I can't really explain why, but it does seem like people were more lucky when they believed they were more fortunate.
Yeah, yeah.
And he, some of it was explainable and some of it wasn't so explainable.
Right, right.
So why is that? I don't know. But it makes more sense to have more opportunity than less. So if I can do something that's not much of a stretch for me to say, okay, well, I'll be open to possibility. I'll be open to being creative with my thinking patterns. I'll be open to chanting something that makes me feel good about my future and what I'm creating. I'll be willing to visualize a positive event and step into that event and really feel that that's true for me. I'd be willing to burn a candle. I'm willing to, to do these acts that ground the creative mind into reality.
Yeah.
And most of the time it works. That's the weird thing, is that it works.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I can't explain
fascinating.
why, but it works.
Well, just
It's magic.
The basic concept in quantum physics that you observe something and you change it. Magic is a way of observing something that maybe we wouldn't have thought about a particular topic in that way. And by engaging in some kind of magic, you're now thinking about that topic in a different way, and then therefore maybe having some kind of influence on it.
In psychology, we have cognitive bias. Right?
Yes.
That which you are predisposed to believe, you will tend to filter from your experiences, and you'll begin to see that thing that you're filtering for.
Yes, absolutely. We did a show on internal representations.
We did.
And I would imagine that magic has all kinds of internal representations for different people in different ways.
It does.
And that affects your physiology. And
It
that
does.
affects who you are and how you behave and the results you get, as we have explored.
Yes, yes. Bards traveled throughout Europe, sharing wisdom, druidic wisdom, and singing songs and giving poetry. And it was thought of as more than just poetry. They weren't just, ancient Goths that were trying to be taken seriously. To become a bard took many, many years of devotion and learning. And when they went around from town to town, they were respected. And they shared their art. And they thought of what they were doing as magic. They didn't think of it as just music or just poetry.
Yeah.
They felt that they were weaving spells.
Okay.
According to history and traditions, they were effecting a sacred magic throughout the land in poetic form. And I think anyone who's ever spent time reading a good story starts to understand the power and transformation of a good story.
Yeah. Well, a story, fictional stories are not real. But boy, they sure can teach you lessons. They sure can change how you feel about things. They sure can give you a new perspective on your life.
Yeah.
Just like movies can, or a song can. They can create real change.
They can.
Sometimes I'll do acupuncture on people, and they'll get an amazing result. A result that just seems like there's no way just sticking this tiny little needle in somebody's wrist is going to suddenly make that neck feel better, or that head feel better. And it seems magical. And sometimes people will say, how does acupuncture work? How could it do that? And sometimes I just go, there's things about it that we know, but for the most part, it's magical.
That's great.
I'll just say that because it's like basically admitting that we don't know. We know some things that are happening, but what we know about it just can't explain how well it works at times, and magic, I don't know.
I think that's a great answer because we don't know.
Yeah, right.
Imagine if we were to go back, into, let's say, the 17th century even.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
You and I get burned at the stake.
Oh, yeah. Depending on where we live, that's undoubtedly true.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask you, Satch, have you ever experienced anything that you would describe as possibly supernatural, occult, paranormal, or magical in some way?
Absolutely. I had an experience once where I believe something saved me from a terrible car accident. And it went like this. Me and a good friend of mine, my buddy Danny, we used to go fishing at a lake late at night and fish for catfish. It was just something that we did. And this lake was across the street from a movie theater. We decided we would go see a movie. And then after the movie, we would just drive across the street to the lake and, fish for a few hours and then go home late. This particular night, I was driving. I pulled out of the parking lot to drive towards the lake. I made a right turn onto the street, and suddenly I couldn't figure out where I was. Now, I had been in this place many times. I knew exactly where I was. It was just literally across the street. I make a right turn, go through a traffic light, make another right turn into the parking lot, and we're there. It's that easy. We get out onto the street, and as I'm approaching the traffic light, I said to my friend Danny, I said, wait a minute, where's the lake? He looked at me with a puzzled, look on his face like, you crazy? It's just straight ahead. Just go straight. I said, okay. And as I started going, as I got really close to the intersection, I just thought, this just can't be right. I was so turned around. I hit the brakes to slow down in case I needed to go a different direction. And a car was on the wrong side of the road, and there was an island on the road separating the two lanes. And he ran the red light and switched lanes from the wrong side of the road to the proper side of the road through the intersection. And he was probably going about 70 miles an hour. He was going fast.
Wow.
And I never even got my foot. I had taken my foot off the brake, and he went right past me, and I never even got my foot back on the brake. It happened so quickly. And Danny and I realized that had I not been disoriented in a place that I'd been many, many, many times and know very well, we probably would both have been dead.
Wow.
And it was a very contemplative night fishing that night. And I have to reflect back on that experience. There is no reason I didn't know where I was. There's no reason I should have gotten turned around. And the timing was so precise. It was so perfect that car missed my front bumper by maybe 2 inches. And I recall in my mind that had I been going a normal speed, the speed that I would have been going, it would have hit me right at the door. That was a pretty magical experience for me in the sense that I can't explain it. My behavior was altered. My perceptions were altered. It didn't make sense why it occurred, and we were absolutely, completely saved because of it.
Wow.
That was pretty magical. I mean, it wasn't ritualistic. It wasn't...
It was spontaneous...
It was spontaneous. It's something that just happened to occur.
Yeah.
It wasn't associated with any sort of ritualistic type of thing or maybe an authority figure changing my belief. It just happened. But that causes me, as a fellow psychonaut, to want to explore, how did that happen? Why did that happen? Was that really me on some level that did that? Was that something else that was looking out for me? I don't know. I don't know what it was. But that was a very real experience.
I love that you've had that experience and can relate, because you're not alone. I've felt those experiences. So many other people on the planet have felt those experiences. And I really like to keep an open mind about what it's all about. I like to keep an open mind about interpretations around it. I love the idea that it could very well have been an ancestor protecting you.
Yeah.
I love the idea
that
that your higher consciousness may have stepped in, the holy guardian angel, that higher part of you, the genius part of you may have stepped in and altered things.
Right.
I love the idea that there is a coordination of the two, that maybe another being stimulated that part of you.
Yes.
And created that feeling. I love the idea that you may have had a subconscious premonition.
Yeah.
A precognitive awareness of some kind.
Right.
Stepping in and then seizing control of your nervous system for a moment.
Maybe the higher self of the idiot driving the car
Right.
saved me and therefore saved him. Because we all three probably would have died.
Absolutely.
Or 4 or 5, however many people were in that car.
I love the idea that a blessing you received from someone else, or a prayer from someone else close to you, caused a change to occur in accordance with their will, which altered the events at just that moment so that the timing of their driving and the timing of you being confused coordinated in such a way as to avoid disaster.
Right, right. Or maybe the possibility that my little black box of luck was full that day.
Or
who knows?
Exactly. Or the idea that the mantra that you used to chant,
yeah, that's right,
burn through some negative karma, allowing you to slip by.
Right.
See, there's so many different ways to take it. It's fun. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it tickles me that there are so many different, equally plausible supernatural explanations, as well as plausible explanations that could be considered more rational, scientific, explanations. And it's all wonderful.
Ultimately, it doesn't matter because I'm alive.
Yeah, and you can appreciate it, which just says something about you, that you appreciate the gift of that moment. That's magical. You and I were talking about the Kung Fu series,
yes,
which we grew up on.
Yes, we talk about this a lot. We love the show.
And you mentioned a story that I think really relates to this whole idea of sacred deception. Would you mind sharing that again?
Yeah, absolutely. There was an episode where young Cain was reflecting back on his time at the monastery, the Shaolin monastery. And in this episode, there was an old doctor, an old monk doctor, and a man was brought to him who had somehow, mutilated his hand. I think he had cut his finger off. This old doctor was realizing that this man was getting sick, that there was infection, and that his arm needed to be amputated. But the patient was very resistant to doing this. He would not let the doctor cut his arm off. So what the doctor did was he put some rice up on the window ledge to attract a crow that I guess lived in the area. And so the crow landed on the window ledge, and the doctor convinced the patient that this crow was the spirit of his finger, and it needed to be appeased, and there was something that it wanted. And basically what he got the man to believe is that what the spirit wanted was the treatment that the doctor had to give, which was to cut off the arm. And so the man was screaming and crying, "Please, doctor, make the spirit go away. Make the spirit go away," because the spirit wanted to take his life. But you could appease the spirit by just giving him your arm. And he deceived his patient into accepting the treatment that he needed to save his life.
Wow.
And that just seems like a pretty sacred deception.
Wow.
Beautiful story.
It is. It reminds me of, do you remember when we did Vipassana? Some of the Dharma stories, the Dharma talks that were at the end of the night after meditating for 10 or 11 hours.
Loved those.
You remember the one about the woman who refused to release her dead baby?
Yes, I love that story.
It sounds so morbid and grotesque, but
do tell it.
Okay, well, I just think it was amazing. I actually wept when I heard it because I just recognized the therapeutic value in letting go. And I think that was the core of the story. But apparently there was someone who came to the Buddha asking for assistance because this one woman whose child had died just wasn't letting go of the idea that her baby would wake up one day. She had this delusion that she was suffering, and it was causing suffering, not just for her, but for those around her.
Yes.
A lot of misery was coming from her just not accepting that her baby was dead. And so she held on to her baby, and that delusion that her baby was just sleeping, she just wouldn't let go. So the Buddha reflected on this, and he decided that he needed to help And so he went to the village and he had an audience with her, or she had an audience with him rather, because I think she believed that the Buddha could help her with this problem that she had.
Yeah.
I think in her mind, the deception was that he would somehow be able to get her baby to wake up.
Yeah.
Right? So the Buddha used this opportunity to help her. And what he did is after she said, please, Gautama, can you cause my baby to wake up? My baby is still asleep and it's been asleep for so long and won't wake up, and it's distressful and all these. And the Buddha, recognizing her suffering, found an insightful solution by asking her to go, and he said he would do it on the condition that she go to every home and every local village and collect at least one grain of some kind from any home, any household where there has been no loss. And so it seemed like a simple task. And he said, if you do this, I will help you with your situation. So she agreed naturally and accepted that and went out around, and everywhere she went, of course, she could not find a place where no one had suffered loss of any kind. So she comes back to the Buddha after a very long and arduous search and is depressed and says, I can't find any place where there hasn't been any loss. So how am I ever going to get my baby to wake up?
Yeah.
And at that moment, she was willing to release her baby. And I remember the Buddha taking the baby from her.
Yeah.
And her finally being willing to realize that her loss doesn't make her alone. She's part of the human race, that we all lose things. We all lose things that are important to us. The lives of our loved ones and our own lives. And it's just part of life, that life is suffering or contains suffering in it. And I think that moment of conveying a truth to her through a sacred deception, getting her to realize something of value without spelling it out, but allowing her to come to that truth through the process, the ritual that she had to do in order to get it, transformed her in such a way, or to such a degree, that she was willing to finally break free or let go of the delusion she'd been suffering. And truly allow healing to enter into her life by letting go of something she was attached to. And all of that was facilitated through a clever ruse, a sacred deception.
Right. So beautifully done.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of another story we would have learned during our meditation training. It's the story of the young man who went to the Buddha and said that his father had died, and he wanted him to do a ritual that would open the gates of heaven so his father could enter heaven. And so the Buddha told the boy, go get some pots, some clay pots, and get 2 clay pots, fill one of them with ghee, clarified butter, and the other one with stones, and then bring them back to me. And so he thought, oh, good. He's going to do this ritual, and it's going to help my father. And so he goes and he gets the pots, and he fills one with ghee, and he fills one with stones. And then he says, okay, sir, I've done what you've asked. I have the 2 pots. And he says, okay, now take them to a pond or a lake or something. He said, and put the pots in the water so that they sink down underneath. He says, okay, very good. Then he said, get some monks to come and be prepared to chant, and take a stick and then put the stick under the water and break open the pot of ghee, and then also break open the pot that holds the rocks, and then have the priests chant, rocks, please float to the top, and butter, please sink down to the bottom. And as he was telling this kid the story, the kid started to smile and realize that he was being teased by the Buddha. And he said, sir, you're teasing me. The rocks can't float and the butter's not going to sink. He said, yes, and now you understand that the deeds of your father are what will cause him to go where he goes after he dies. If his deeds were good and light like butter, he floats up to heaven. If they were bad, then he sinks down to hell. And it's just the natural way. and the kid learned the lesson that, okay, I see. There's no ritual that I can do to cause my father to go into heaven. He's going to enter based upon his own merits.
That's so great. Just the whole idea that these metaphors can convey an idea and a feeling and a whole experience. Once that experience is conveyed, they have that experience. They own it. It's not just something that was told to them, because what happened is they actually participated as active listeners to that sacred deception, that story. They took it on, and that change happened in a very tangible way for that person.
Yeah.
So I just love that. That is also magic. It's causing change to happen in accordance with will, right?
Yes.
And imagine the results. Imagine the differences between having made a realization like that, a powerful, profound realization, versus not having made a realization and being stuck where you were.
Yeah.
Right. That there's such contrast between those two things, and the one thing that caused it, the one thing that stimulated it, was a sacred deception.
Yes. I love it.
Yeah.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. The show is produced by Oliver Alteen. Our theme music is composed by Oliver Alteen. You can find more information on our website, authenticityshow.com. Thanks for listening, and have an authentic day.